This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Episode 663, my friends. Thanks for joining me. Today we want to talk about some of the common marketing mistakes people make. And, I ran across High Impact Content Marketing by Purna Virj a while back. I don't know if I heard it on a different podcast or where I ran across it, but very interesting read, great read. There's always new things you can learn, even if you've been in content marketing for a while. And even if you're reading something in there that's not new to you, at the very least, it reiterates some of the problems that you're seeing, some of the things that are happening, and what can you do about them? There's always something you can do to move forward and get your content to perform. So very excited to talk to Purna today on episode 663 of the Business Storytelling Show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, you work at LinkedIn as well as a content consultant, basically working with customers, right, to get their content to perform better and pick the right strategies. Certainly, that's always an important thing as well.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some of the common mistakes people make. I know you lay out 5, and certainly I have a hard time disagreeing with any of them. I see some of those things happening and people struggling with trying to overcome them and move forward in the best possible way. But kind of walk us through, what's the first one that you see happening quite often that you outline in your book?
This is the one that I think everybody listening would be able to just nod their heads and agree with, which is focusing on outputs over outcomes. And by that, I mean, there's always this cry, right? Sales isn't performing. We need more leads. The answer is more content. And so many folks get stuck like, oh, I need to churn out like 50 blog posts about this. So I need to churn out 100 posts for social media a week. And we just get so bogged down by the number of things that we just need to keep creating and creating and creating. And what that does is exhausts marketers in the first place, because content creation, especially good content creation, takes time, energy, and effort. And 2, it's just going into the ether unread, because so many people will come up with the most in-depth research-filled white paper to be like, look, I created this ebook, I created this white paper, but crickets, no one is coming to do that. And so much of it is because they're like, oh, we need, we have this content calendar, we need to put this stuff out there. And to that, I'm like, why are we stuck on this content, factory assembly line where it's like create, publish, repeat, and hope? Right? We need to be much more deliberate and strategic in our efforts and what we go. If we sort of start by thinking about what are the business outcomes that we want to impact, then very often what we can find is that if we carefully tailor our content to the audience behavior changes that we're trying to drive, 1 or 2 pieces of content can perform incredibly well for you, more than even 100 posts would. So that is one of the biggest mistakes I tell people if they're like, oh, I don't have the resources to keep creating content. And I'm like, well, stop, don't. Go and look at the backlog. Go and look at what others in your company are creating, because I bet you between like PR teams and product teams, and there's a ton of other teams who are creating that content. So that's my mistake number 1, is stop the outputs and put the emphasis on outcomes you're trying to drive.
It's interesting too. I grew up as a journalist, and certainly, you create new content every day. You write an article every day. You go on TV every day, whatever channel, you were a journalist in, for example. But I actually, I have, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of articles now on ChristopherTrapp.com. And certainly I go back and I update them. And there was one article recently where I talk about the eye contact, right? Like, how do you create the illusion of eye contact? Because, does it really happen when you do it on a live stream or digitally? And the article I had just by a couple updates, I got it to rank way better, drives way more revenue than it did just a couple months ago. So I think people forget about that too, right? Like, don't just create one time and then you're done, but go back and update things and optimize them and see what it's ranking for.
Exactly, which is actually the perfect segue to mistake number two, which is focusing all of the time, energy, and effort on creation and then not an equal or proportionate amount of time on distribution. Like Christoph, you've got one of the most sophisticated distribution networks ever. Like I get your newsletter, I see all your posts, even this podcast, it's on so many different platforms where you're making the most. You're creating and ensuring that your content reaches the audience in the platform that they prefer. We're meeting them where they are. So I always joke, I'm like, hey, if you drop a piece of content and no one's around to hear it, like, does it still drive any impact? And the answer is actually no. I have been guilty of this in the past myself as well, where I'm like, oh, I wrote this really awesome thing. I hit publish. Now I'm like, everyone's seeing it, right? I can never use it again. And that's not the case at all, right? The first time you put something out there, not everyone is going to see it. And even if they do see it, they may not be in the mood to even receive it or take in that message. And so if you put things out there, repetition helps, right? Spaced repetition helps messages stick in your mind, right? It's the same reason why you'll hear brands reinforce their taglines, time and time again, because it sticks. But the second big thing is that good content can work time and time again. That is the big power. So even if I've sort of seen something before, like you were saying earlier, reinforcement or a reminder of even the common best practices is so critical. And I always use this funny example. Like I have a really close, one of my girlfriends, she's super close to me. I know her kids and everything. And I was at her house and her 10-year-old comes running up to me to be like, Auntie Purna. I'm like, oh, what, love? And he's like, oh, I just discovered this new band. Like, I love this song. They're so good. I found them on TikTok. I've been listening to them. I'm like, oh, show me, Jamie. Like, what is it? Christoph, do you want to hazard a guess at what band it was?
I'm not a good guesser. Go ahead.
It was ABBA. Yeah,
Way
ABBA
back
is.
then.
I'm like, it's not new, but it's new to them, and everyone loves. I mean, I remember my parents listening to ABBA, and as a kid, I would dance along and sing to it. My son, I would do that, and so it's so funny that good content will always resonate time and time again to a brand new audience. So, in that sense, exactly as you were saying, if you've created once, you can post it and you can post it again. You can get creative and remix it into a different format, right? If you're taking this kind of podcast we're listening to, you could probably turn it into a blog post. You could probably turn it into little snippets, right? Of course, that you do all of these things so well. So it's just making sure that you're not spending like thousands of hours on content creation and then being like done. Because so many times, I think you will have seen this as well, where a content marketer will go and publish a piece of content, it doesn't do that well, and then they're like, oh, scrap it, it failed, and we give up too soon on content. It just may not be the right time, right platform, right format. And maybe if it was remixed into an infographic, it would do better. Maybe if it was another rather than maybe it was on YouTube versus TikTok, it would do better, right? Who knows? So there are, like, don't give up too soon.
So is the one we just discussed not balancing creation versus distribution, actually?
Exactly.
Got it. It's very interesting to me is how people, I mean, I think it's because creation takes so long and it takes way more time in theory than distribution, right? It's kind of like when people build a website, like, why do companies announce that they build a new website? Why? Does anybody still care that somebody launched a new website? I personally think they don't, but to the company, it took so long to do the whole thing, right? Which I think is why people actually, it's hard to balance, right? Because creation takes longer than distribution in theory. And I think that's probably one reason why that happens. I know one of the next ones is chasing trends versus being grounded in strategy. And this is, I'd like to hear your take on this one. But one question I have for you on this is, I like to be grounded in strategy 100%. But I also chase trends, right? YouTube shorts trends, TikTok trends, what's currently working on LinkedIn. Should I put my link still in a comment? I just opined on that the other day and I said, absolutely not, because nobody can ever find the link in the comments because it's like, the way it's threaded, it's completely different than it was when Guy Kawasaki first said that. So how do you find that balance and why is that a common mistake?
It's such a common mistake because you don't invest enough time. Like so often, if time, resources, everything are limited, which, let's be honest, they are. Then if you're just running from one place to the other, right? Oh, NFTs came out. Oh, Web3. Now it's all about AI. Now I need to talk about this, or I need to talk about that. And oh, this new platform has come up. This is the hottest platform du jour. Let me chase it. And then what you're doing is you just keep moving things around enough and not give yourself enough time to build up a base, because it is impossible to do well in like 100 different platforms, right? It's just not reasonable. Or even if you could do it, you could do it for a short amount of time. But at some point, you're going to start really feeling resentful, like, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And so if you kept, chasing different silver bullets in the hope, like, oh, this new advanced thing will solve all my problems, then I think that the expectations versus reality is going to disappoint you. Whereas if you have a very solid, like rooted in strategy, rooted in what does my audience want, where do they hang out, what are the desired outcomes that I'm expecting this piece of content to drive from my business, like once you have that solid foundation, keep up with your bread and butter, your regular sort of channels and platforms. And then you can still have some kind of leeway to experiment as well. So certainly experiment, certainly see what's trying. There's always an early adopter advantage, but not at the cost of what's really coming in. So there's long form, short form, there's sort of platforms that are for awareness, there's platforms and channels that you can use for building relationships that are owned, earned, paid, not paid. Like if you try to do everything, you'll lose. And if you're constantly trying to do a new thing every few months, because oh, the boss said like this is so important, like I need to be on there. Well, do you really need to? Like, is your audience there? Like, just because a platform is very popular, used in a certain way, doesn't mean that your audience is there or using it in the same way. And so that is the number one thing, is that what are the business outcomes I'm looking to drive? And based on that, who's the right audience and where do they hang out? What do they want? And if you know that, that's where you can go ahead and do the 80% bread and butter, do the 20% testing, or whatever split feels more natural to you based on your resources and goals. That can work.
You know
How
what's
have you
interesting?
tried it, Christoph? Though I'm so curious.
How do I do it?
Like, how do you approach new platforms? Because you have incredible distribution.
Yeah, thank you. I see how I can fit it in, how I can make
Mm,
it all work together. So, for example, right, we have this podcast, and I'm going to take some of these clips and literally use them as YouTube shorts, literally use them as TikToks, literally take the same clip and just reformat it 16 by 9 as opposed to 9 by 16 and use that same clip on LinkedIn as a post, right?
right.
So, because that way it looks way better on LinkedIn or even a square than, the TikTok version. And that whole process, it takes time, but it doesn't take as much time as it used to take. I use Opus clips to hack them up, and obviously it gives you an idea on what you should use, even though they changed the layout. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to get used to that again. But my point is, it all kind of fits together, right? And I was going to use those clips on YouTube anyways. Might as well just reformat them and use them on LinkedIn. And then I'll run this probably through Claude AI and say, hey, what are some other articles I can get out of this content? And then I'll figure out, hey, do I want to write about that? Do I care about that topic? Is there search volume? All those different things. So, and then I prioritize, because there's a gazillion things you could do. And certainly who has the time, which is probably one of the reasons
Yeah.
why people, your next one, right, is prioritizing short term versus long term. It's probably one reason why people do that, right? Because the short term, the fire is burning, I got to put it out. The long term, who knows what the emergency is in a month or two or three or eight. But content, SEO especially, I mean, it's a long term strategy. But why is that? Is that the reason why that's a big problem, or why do you see that happening?
I think so. This is my personal opinion, is that a lot of these instant analytics platforms that we've had, like just that access to like reams and reams of data that has been so easily found, like, oh, last click attribution or like whatever's happening, the recency has sort of trained us to keep looking at these short term results. So even in B2B, like, you know this, the average sales cycle in B2B is not weeks, like it's or months, and especially longer in this time of sort of economic uncertainty, as budgets, more and more people are being a little bit more wary with their budgets, or budgets are smaller, buying cycles are just getting longer. But what we find is that so many marketers will still launch a campaign and then gauge its success for like leads or gens in the first 2 weeks itself. But I'm like, but if your average sales cycle is 90 days or more, then why are you measuring it in the first two weeks? So I always say that if you were trying to make ice cream at home, you wouldn't just go and check it in the freezer every hour to be like, oh, it's still liquid. Like, what's happening? Obviously, I don't know how to make ice cream, or my fridge won't freeze ice cream. No, you just need to give it time. And that's where, because the ease of accessing these short-term metrics is so prolific, that we often think that that's what we've got to judge it by. And that's where people really miss out on building that kind of trust and credibility and relationships, right? One of the biggest things we're seeing now is, with advances in AI, just the barriers to content creation have become so much lower. And so there's so much more competition now, right? It seems like anybody and everybody from all corners of the world is creating content. And so with so much more competition, you just have to stand out and do better. But if all you're doing is like lead gen, lead gen, lead gen, and hitting people over the head to just like buy now or fill out this form now for like whatever 50th white paper or ebook on the same topic, why would they want to do that, right? The biggest thing people forget is how much more important trust is getting, and how much more incredibly important building credibility is. Because at some point, there's only a finite number of people who are ready to buy. How do you keep filling that bucket? How do you keep making sure that people think of you at the right time when it's time to make a purchasing decision? Right? Isn't there like, I was looking online and it seemed like there was like some 1,400-ish CRM companies just in the US alone. But Christoph, if tomorrow you were buying a new CRM system, you're probably not going to evaluate all 1,400 of them against each other, right? You're probably going to look at the 5 or 10 that you remember. And so that's where building that credibility, building that sort of brand awareness and the memory structure is so important. And that doesn't happen in 2 weeks. So if all you're looking at your marketing success or your SEO or your content marketing in the first like week or so, or just simply for its ability to drive leads in an instant, then you're missing out on the absolute massive, incredible power that content has.
What's interesting to me too is, yes, AI is making content creation easier in theory, but I think most everybody, I don't know what the number is, but many people use AI completely incorrectly, right? I mean, even even on LinkedIn, let's pick on that for a second. Like LinkedIn will write a post for me based on what I've already put into the post, right? So it doesn't just go, I don't just go, hey, write me a post with AI. It says, I write something, and then it says rewrite with AI or something, right? But
Yeah.
the source content is actually my thought. So
Mhm.
the AI is going to make it better, but it doesn't come up with my thought. And I see a lot of people, they just go to whatever tool and they go, hey, write me an article on the most common mistakes in marketing, and it pulls the common mistakes from wherever. So like, if the transcript of this is somewhere, it might pull it from the transcript, but it's not their thoughts. They're your thoughts, right? They're your experiences. So I think AI can work, but you have to use it correctly, which kind of fits in. I know we're going to be running out of time here in about 4.5 minutes or so, but the which goes to your final point is people
Yeah,
writing
creating some machines over people.
over people, which, I mean, talk about that for a little bit. But I was on a podcast the other day and they said to me, AI will help writing for machines. And I said, absolutely not. The machines that evaluate your content, they're looking how human the content is. Can you influence them for a little while? Maybe, but long term, I don't think it's possible. What are your thoughts?
I would very much agree. I mean, having worked at a search engine, having worked at a social media platform, having been in this industry for over 2 decades, you can tell that so many times when people are like, well, what will Google like, or what will Bing rank, or what will Facebook write, or so on, like you're not chasing the algorithm. That's absolutely the wrong question. Ultimately, the goal of the algorithm is to chase the people and keep up with what people want, because the more a platform can serve the people that come to the platform with what they're looking for, the more reasons people have to keep coming back. And then the higher the user base, the more the revenue can be made in terms of higher ad prices, etc. So that's one of the biggest things to remember. Is like, how do these platforms make money? It's like when people come, and so the algorithm is there to please and wow the user, so they come back. So if you want to go ahead and like create for the machine, so quote unquote, don't focus on the algorithm. Algorithms change every single time. Like it's a game of cat and mouse. You can keep creating, but the algorithm is always going to win, right, in the end. So I would say always align yourself in the same direction. They want to appeal to people. You should also appeal to people, because at the end of the day, people relate to people want to hear from people will follow people before brands, and people buy from people. So you've got to make sure that your content appeals to the humans, right? So this tendency now, oh, AI is there, I could just create 50 blog posts on this topic because this is a popular keyword. Like, no one's going to read it. If it's a thin, poor quality content, how is it going to resonate? But in fact, if you create a great piece of content that appeals to people and they like it and they engage with it and they share it, then the algo will reward it with increased reach. So it's very, very karmic in a way.
It's very interesting to me too, because I've had content that has ranked really well. In fact, there's the one I mentioned earlier. I think it's ranking in number one currently. I'm not sure it has any backlinks. And somebody once said to me, "Oh my goodness, you're ranking that high without a backlink." And I'm like, "How is that even possible?" "Oh, that's impossible." And I'm like, "Well, you know what? It's just my story. Here's how I fixed the problem. Here's how it works." Google still recognizes that it doesn't actually need the backlink to figure that out. So, long story short, write for the human, be authentic, share your story. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Congratulations on the success with your book. I know you got yet another award earlier this week, I think. So congratulations on that. In the last 30 seconds here, tell us, how do people reach out to you? Who should reach out to you? Who can work with you?
Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for having me, Christoph. You could find me, of course, on LinkedIn or on Twix, which is what, like Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. So I'm just at Purna Virj on both. And so please reach out. Please say hello at any time. Would be wonderful.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.